I want to start with a question most of us don't ask out loud. What if the thing holding you back the most in your adult life is something that happened before you could even name it? See, I've spent decades researching emotions like vulnerability and shame, not just as concepts, but as forces that shape our lives. And what I've learned is this: childhood shame doesn't stay in childhood. It grows with us. It evolves. It disguises itself as perfectionism, people-pleasing, procrastination, anger, even isolation. It whispers, "You're not enough," and then it turns up the volume every time we try to be seen. Some of the most successful, brilliant, kind-hearted adults I've sat with carry the same invisible weight. A shame story that started when they were 5, 6, 10 years old and never got named, let alone healed. And here's the truth that can be hard to face, but freeing to acknowledge. Shame is not just a memory, it's a pattern. Shame is a story we don't realize we're still telling ourselves. Shame isn't just a memory, it's a narrative. And the most painful part, most of us don't even know we're still telling it. And when we're kids, our brains aren't fully equipped to make sense of complicated emotional experiences. We can't look at a parent's silence and think, maybe they're overwhelmed or emotionally unavailable because of their own trauma. No. What we internalize instead is, I must be too much, or worse, I'm not enough. That's the moment the shame story begins, not with logic, but with meaning we attach to pain. And shame is sticky. It's not like fear or guilt that comes and goes with situations. Shame embeds itself into identity. A child who gets constantly criticized doesn't grow up thinking, I was unfairly judged. They grow up thinking, I'm never going to get it right. And here's where it gets tricky, because over time, that belief becomes a lens, not just about how we see ourselves, but how we interpret everything. Every rejection feels personal. Every silence feels like proof. Every success feels like luck or a fluke. I remember sitting across from someone in a workshop who said, I've spent my whole adult life trying to be good enough, and I just realized I never even asked who I was trying to be good enough for. And that's what shame does. It keeps us in this loop of chasing validation without ever asking why we're starving for it in the first place. There's research that shows by age 7, kids already carry internalized messages about their worth. By 12, those beliefs are often deeply embedded, and they show up later as chronic self-doubt, difficulty setting boundaries, or the inability to believe we're lovable just as we are. And here's the hard truth: unless we're aware of it, we don't grow out of shame, we grow into it. Think about it. How many of us are in relationships where we're constantly afraid of being too needy or not enough? How many of us stay quiet at work or in friendships because we're terrified someone will find out we're not actually as competent as they think? That's not adult logic. That's childhood shame dressed up in adult behavior. One of the patterns I see most often is this: we work hard, we achieve, we try to be all the things to all the people, and it still doesn't feel like enough. And then we blame ourselves for feeling that way as if it's a character flaw. But what we're really dealing with is a shame narrative we never named. And until we name it, we can't challenge it. That's why awareness is the first act of courage. Saying, maybe the way I treat myself isn't based on truth, it's based on an old story I didn't even write, is revolutionary. Because once we see it, we get to question it. We get to ask, is this belief mine, or was it handed to me by someone who couldn't see my work? And here's what I know from years of listening and learning. The moment we realize we've been living from a script we didn't choose, we also realize we can rewrite it. That's where healing begins. Not by pretending the story didn't happen, but by deciding we're no longer going to let it define who we are today. It shows up in adult behavior as protection, not truth. That deep discomfort you feel when someone compliments you and you instantly deflect with a joke or change the subject, that's not just humility, that's protection.
Yeah.
It's armor. And it probably started when you were a kid learning that praise came with pressure, or worse, punishment. Shame doesn't just hurt us once and leave. It teaches us how to avoid getting hurt again. And it's sneaky. It doesn't sound like I'm ashamed. It sounds like I can't speak up in this meeting because I don't want to sound stupid. Or I can't get too close to anyone because they'll eventually leave. What we call insecurity or social anxiety or being private is often just shame in disguise, doing its best to protect us from being seen and possibly judged. Let's be honest, we all develop ways of surviving emotional pain. That's what the brain does, it adapts. And in childhood, when we feel rejected or not good enough, the brain says, okay, let's not feel that again. So maybe you start becoming the kid who gets perfect grades, or the one who's always agreeable, or the one who fades into the background so you won't be noticed, because being noticed was dangerous. Those protective patterns, they work for a while. They get us love, attention, or at the very least, they keep us safe. But as adults, they often become the very behaviors that hold us back. The perfectionist who can't rest. The people pleaser who can't say no. The high achiever who feels like a fraud no matter how successful they become. And here's what I want to say with as much gentleness as possible. Those behaviors made sense. They were brilliant, actually, given what you were trying to survive. But now, they're not truth. They're not your identity. They're just strategies you learned to feel safe in a world that didn't always make you feel worthy. One of the hardest things for us to admit is that we've been protecting ourselves for so long we've forgotten what it feels like to actually live, to be present without the constant scanning for danger. Emotional, relational, reputational. To express an idea without rehearsing it in our heads 10 times. To rest without guilt. To receive love without suspicion. But here's the kicker. The armor we put on to protect ourselves from shame often ends up confirming it. When we don't speak up because we're afraid of sounding dumb and then our ideas never get heard, we reinforce the lie that we don't matter. When we pretend we're fine all the time, no one sees our real needs and we end up feeling more alone. Shame doesn't need to keep attacking us. It just needs us to keep protecting ourselves from things that aren't actually dangerous anymore. What are the things you think are flaws? Your sensitivity, your desire for connection, your need for rest, aren't flaws at all, but human truths that shame told you to hide. And what if, by taking off that armor, even just a little, you could start showing up in ways that reflect who you really are, not just who you had to be to survive? That's the invitation. To start noticing the moments where protection kicks in and to ask gently, what am I really afraid of right now? Because the answer to that question will almost always lead you back to something tender, something old, something that deserves compassion, not judgment. And that's how we start to loosen shame's grip, not by forcing change, but by meeting our armor with understanding and then slowly, bravely letting it go. Shame thrives in secrecy, silence, and judgment. Shame is like mold. It grows in the dark. The more we hide it, the stronger it becomes. It doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs us to stay quiet, to keep our heads down, and to keep believing we're the only ones feeling what we're feeling. One of the most common things I hear when people begin to open up about shame is, I thought I was the only one. And that right there is the most painful part of shame. It isolates. It convinces us that whatever happened to us, whatever we did or didn't do, whatever we're feeling, makes us unworthy of connection. So we don't talk about it. We tuck it away. We tell ourselves we've moved on. But silence doesn't mean healing. It just means carrying that weight alone. When we don't speak shame, we're actually giving it permission to keep shaping how we see ourselves. It becomes this quiet narrator in the background of our lives, chiming in with lines like, "You're too much. you're not enough, they wouldn't understand, this is your fault. And when no one challenges that voice, when we don't bring it into the light, it becomes the truth we live by, even if it's not true at all. And here's the tough part. We live in a culture that rewards perfectionism and punishes vulnerability. We're told to keep it together, to move on, to stay strong, as if strength is about silence. But real strength, it's about honesty. It's about being brave enough to say, this hurts, or I'm scared, or I've been carrying this for a long time and I don't want to carry it alone anymore. The research is clear. Shame needs 3 things to survive: secrecy, silence, and judgment. But when you speak shame, when you name it and share it with someone who responds with empathy, it can't hold the same power. That's not just feel-good advice. That's neuroscience. When we speak our truth and it's met with compassion, our brain chemistry actually shifts. The threat response lowers. Our nervous system begins to regulate. We feel seen, we feel safe, and we begin to believe we're not alone. I've sat with people whose lives changed, not because someone fixed them or gave them a solution, but because someone sat across from them and said, yeah, me too. That simple acknowledgement can be the first breath of air after years underwater. Because the moment shame is spoken, it loses the secrecy that fuels it. But I also want to say this, not everyone has earned the right to hear your shame story. Sharing isn't the same as oversharing. About choosing safe, trustworthy people who know how to hold space without judgment. People who won't try to minimize your pain or fix it, but who will simply stay with you in it. That kind of connection, it's how we begin to feel whole again. Because the opposite of shame isn't pride, it's empathy. And empathy can't exist in silence. It lives in shared experience, in honest conversation, in moments of me too and you're not broken. And when we invite that kind of connection into our lives, shame starts to loosen its grip, not all at once, but slowly, gently, and with a whole lot of grace. We mistake shame for motivation, but it's actually exhaustion in disguise. It's easy to believe that shame is the fuel behind our ambition. That voice in our head that says, do more, be more, prove them wrong, can sound like drive, like passion, even like purpose. But underneath that hustle, what's really happening is something much more fragile. It's fear. It's exhaustion. And most of all, it's shame whispering that who we are isn't enough, so we better earn our worth fast. I can't tell you how many people I've spoken with who have achieved remarkable things, degrees, businesses, awards, and still feel like imposters. Still feel like they're running from something, not toward something. And when you sit with that long enough, what you see isn't laziness or lack of gratitude. It's a desperate attempt to outrun the old belief that they're only as good as what they produce, that their value lives in what they do, not in who they are. Shame is clever like that. It doesn't come at you yelling, you're worthless. No, it says you should have done better, or don't let them see you fail. It disguises itself as drive and calls itself high standards. But shame isn't a long-term motivator. It's a short-term crisis manager. It can push you for a while, sure, but it burns you out because you're not being pulled by joy. You're being pushed by fear. And what's more, it creates this endless loop. You set an impossible standard, you don't quite meet it, and instead of asking, was that standard fair, shame makes you ask, what's wrong with me? So you double down, you try harder, you work later, you smile bigger, but the bar keeps moving and the finish line keeps disappearing, and eventually your body and your spirit start to break under the weight of trying to prove something you shouldn't have to prove in the first place. And there's a line I often come back to when I'm speaking about this. You can't shame yourself into being more of who you are. You just can't. You can shame yourself into silence, into performance, into people pleasing and perfectionism, but not into authenticity, not into wholeness, not into joy. What I've seen, what I've lived, is that true motivation, the kind that lasts and sustains and feels like alignment instead of anxiety, doesn't come from fear of not being enough. It comes from clarity, from values, from connection to something deeper than approval. When we begin to shift from what will they think of me to what actually matters to me, we begin to reclaim our energy. We begin to breathe again. And we realize that rest, play, and imperfection aren't obstacles to success. They're the foundation of a meaningful life. Because when you spend your entire life running from shame, you miss the beauty of being rooted in your own truth. And that truth is this: you are already enough. Not after the next win, not once you fix the next flaw, right now, as you are. That's not a motivational slogan, it's a birthright. It's also one of the hardest truths to believe. But the more we loosen shame's grip, the more space we create for that truth to settle in and stay. Healing begins when you stop running and start naming. Most of us are really good at staying busy. We fill our calendars, overcommit, check boxes, and then wonder why we still feel empty. But what we're really doing, what so many of us are doing, is running. Not just from discomfort or failure, but from the shame we've never fully acknowledged. From those buried beliefs that say, if they really knew me, or this pain makes me weak, or that part of my past defines who I am. We don't heal by outrunning shame. We heal by turning toward it and naming it for what it is. Now, let me be clear, this is some of the hardest emotional work we'll ever do, because naming shame requires stillness. And stillness invites up all the feelings we've tried to keep buried. But I've learned, over years of listening, researching, and living, that naming is where the transformation begins. You can't shift what you won't name. And shame, especially the kind rooted in childhood, tends to hide in vague emotions. We say we feel off or not good enough or just tired, but when we stop and really ask ourselves, what am I actually feeling right now? So often the answer is shame. I remember talking with a woman who shared that anytime she made a mistake at work, even something small, she felt this intense flood of panic, not just stress, panic. As we dug deeper, what came up wasn't about the job at all. It was about being a little girl who was constantly told that making a mistake meant she was irresponsible, stupid, even unlovable. So now, as an adult, a missed deadline doesn't just feel like an error, it feels like a threat to her worth. And because that wound was never named, never spoken aloud, she kept reliving it again and again without knowing why. Shame that isn't named will run your life quietly, powerfully, and often without you even realizing it. But once it's named, once it's brought into the light, you don't have to carry it alone anymore. And this is important. Naming shame doesn't mean wallowing in it. It doesn't mean making it your identity. It means acknowledging it, honoring the younger version of you that felt it first, and choosing, sometimes daily, to believe a different story now. One that says, that happened, it shaped me, but it doesn't define me. We begin to heal not by pretending we're over it, but by creating enough safety in our lives, through relationships, through therapy, through self-compassion, to stop running, to sit with the discomfort, to speak the truth out loud, and to offer ourselves the empathy we were missing when the shame was born. And here's the beautiful part. The moment we do that, the shame starts to lose its shape. It becomes something we can look at instead of something we're trapped inside of. It becomes a wound we tend to, not a life sentence. And in that space, however small, however fragile at first, healing begins. Here's the truth I want you to carry with you. Shame doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're human. Every single one of us carries something from childhood, messages we absorbed, moments we weren't ready for, emotions we were never taught how to hold. And for far too long, we've let those old stories write our current chapters. But you're not powerless in this. The courage to heal starts with awareness, it deepens with compassion, and it transforms through connection with yourself, with others, and with the truth that you are already enough. You don't need to fix yourself. you need to return to yourself. The parts of you that were silenced, shamed, or told they were too much or not enough, they deserve your love now. And that love isn't a one-time decision. It's a practice, a daily choice to show up, stay soft, and keep moving forward. Even when the past tries to pull you back, you're not too late. You're not too far gone. Healing isn't linear, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but it is possible. And it starts right where you are, with one honest conversation, one act of self-kindness, one deep breath. You are worthy of a life that isn't controlled by shame, and you are capable of building it. Good luck. You've got this.